For our chain stitch embroidery projects, some of my favorite threads to use. Today I'm going to be using a King Tut machine quilting thread because it's variegated. It's a 40 weight 3-ply cotton, and it makes a design about like this with the variegated thread. This is a small wall hanging. It's only about 13 inches. You can also use heavier threads. Tire makes from Japan makes a 100% silk thread in 30 weight. It also makes it in 50 weight. And Gutermann makes a silk thread that is, I think it's about a 30 weight. Alright, so let's put our spool. We're going to put it in place. There we go. I find a fine steel crochet hook is very helpful. We're going to follow the Wilcox and Gibbs Manual's threading diagram. So, first place we come is we make sure that this hand wheel is all the way up, which, okay, this spring back here, this metal part is all the way up, so that when you go to thread through this front hole, you're also threading through this wire staple behind it. I'm going to pull this through. Now we're going to take our thread and we're going in, if you pretend that this automatic tension is a clock, we're going to go in at about 9 o'clock, go behind the automatic tension like up toward 12. Then we're coming out in front, and now we're going to continue on our threading path, which is through this upper piece. We're going to use our steel crochet hook to come down through this staple right here. This is called an embroidery loop, and in the manual it says you can go through that. I haven't found a need to do that with the thread chain stitch embroidery that I use. You're welcome to try that, but I'm having good tension issues and good success this way. We're next coming up here. Okay, next we're going to continue up here, down through this guide, and I like to put the presser foot down to give me good clearance to thread the needle, and the needle threads from the outside to the inside, from left to right.
Okay.
Alright, so I like to leave a very long thread tail. I'm going to manually pull some of this thread forward, lift the presser foot, and place the thread through the toes of the presser foot, and then we're ready to start stitching. So the preparation I've done for my chain stitch embroidery is I've selected a continuous line pattern. This is from I think from Shutterstock's royalty-free images. You can use continuous line quilting designs, you can use simple line drawings, and it's beneficial to have a minimum of stops and starts. So this one is one continuous line, and besides liking this design, the reason I chose it is you get to see how we do these pointy corners when we turn corners, and how we do loops, and how we begin and end. So here's my original cat design. I've traced it onto Golden Threads quilting paper, which is a tearaway stabilizer. Sometimes I will use Pellon 806 stitch and tear stabilizer for the same reason. And these are very helpful to me because I don't have to transfer my design to the fabric. So I have a nice follow the line while I'm stitching. And these papers also provide stability to my fabric to minimize any stretching or distortion. And they're tearaway, so when I'm done, it's easy to remove them and my design is ready to use. Notice one thing on my design. Another reason I chose this one is when you get to the point where you're crossing over places, because we're stitching upside down and backwards in a more intricate design, it can be confusing to know exactly which direction I'm supposed to go in when I reach this. If I come up and go down, then I've completely missed doing this part. So my workaround for that is I like to trace in pencil. I will have a colored pen, and it helps if it contrasts, not just a black pen and a brown pencil. And before I get to where I need to switch directions, I change to a different color so that I can just follow that color to start looping around. Then I can change back to pencil. When I get ready for another intersection, I go ahead and change to a color again, so it's clear to me when I'm stitching which way to go. Ask me how I learned that lesson. All right, we're getting ready to start stitching our cat. We're going to start up here at his tail. Oh, and as I said, we're sewing upside down and backwards. So I trace my design on my paper, either the stabilizers, and then I turned it upside down for a directional design so the cat goes in the direction I'd like. This is very important for something that's not symmetrical or words where you want things to come out facing the right direction. All right, to begin stitching, we're gonna do like we do in any sewing machine. We're gonna hold this tail, give it a little bit of attention to help the machine start stitching. I would do that on a lock stitch machine as well, so you don't get any problems with your thread knotting up. All right, so we're gonna do a stitch or two, and then we can let go of that tail. Now, a wonderful tip that I've learned from the Wilcox and Gibbs Facebook group is, remember that this is the back of our design. So to keep from having to thread a hand sewing needle when I'm done and run this thread tail back in here to secure it, we're going to stitch over it because it's the back of the design. It doesn't make it lumpy on the front. It's the same amount of stitching if you stitch over the tail or not. So I'm going to kind of zigzag. I'm going to sew 2 or 3 stitches, and then I'm going to turn my thread back again. And this will help to lock this end of the thread. I'm trying to roll this. And it simplifies your finishing work when you're done. There we go. All right, so after I've locked that in place with several stitches for an inch or two, we can go ahead and cut this shorter just to get it out of the way. All right, now we're ready to stitch on. The hand crank machine goes along pretty well. This is a methodical process. The feed dogs are doing the work. It's not free motion. I have my machine set at 12 stitches per inch, which seems to be what works pretty well for the designs I do. Here we go. We can pick up the pace a little. Now we're going to get up here and we're going to make a point and see how we do a U-turn. I always sink my needle all the way down in the fabric. If you read the manual, it tells you to raise it up some. You may try that, but I can tell you I have good tension success doing this in this way, so it's the way I do it. To me, it was intuitive. If I used a lock stitch machine to do sewing, I would sink the needle down in the fabric to do a turn. All right. If you're not sure exactly where to sew to, I find it beneficial to sew maybe 1 stitch past where you think you need to on the design. Turn again. Another turn. Finish up the cat's second ear. Leave the needle down. All right. On some gentle curves, you don't always have to stop and move the presser foot. You can use the stability of this tearaway interfacing to help you maneuver the fabric. And we got to do a cute little nose here, so we're going to do a tight loop. We might do that stitch by stitch because it's so tiny. See where the nose goes.
Dark.
We can roll this up in the bigger designs so it's not running into this. And actually, after you've stitched over a certain area, I'm not going to stitch up here anymore. The stitching's going to hold it in place, so I'm going to go ahead and remove some of the pins, which will make things a little more pliant. All right. I'm going to come down this nose again. This is where my two-color design helps to give me a clear path of which way I go so I don't accidentally forget something. And you can see my pink line is going to show me which of these paths I need to take at this intersection. So we're going to raise the needle bar at its highest point, and I'm going to once again manually release some tension from the thread spool so that I have a lot of loose thread. I'm going to raise the presser foot. I'm going to pull this back. And I like to leave a very long thread tail because after we lock this seam, I'm going to need to take a hand sewing needle and thread it with this tail and go back through the through the stitching to further secure it. So it's best to have too long of a tail. You can always cut it shorter, but you can never cut it longer. And if I were going to do another design afterwards, I'd also leave a long thread on the front. I'm not doing this particular design after, so I'll cut this one. All right, so we've cut it, and what we're going to do is we're going to move our work backwards. And that long thread tail is going to get pulled under. You see it's disappearing. Okay, so we were sewing on the back of the work, cut the long thread tail, and it's getting pulled to the other side. And here's our jewel tone variegated cat. So the stitching's complete. I'd like to stress that people always say you've pulled the thread to the other side, so now it's locked. And technically, yes, it is locked. The problem is it's hanging out on the front of your work. And if you were to cut that short to make your work neat, you would be in grave danger of having that thread starting to unravel. And when it unravels, it's like unzipping a zipper, unzipping a bag of dog food. If you crochet, it's like unzipping your crocheted chain. So once we pull the thread, the stabilizer off of here, I will show you how to thread a hand needle and do a discreet back stitch to take this thread to the other side and then sink the tails. As I said when we started, we went ahead and buried our thread tails by stitching over it in a zigzaggy way for 1.5 inches or so that keeps us from having to do that chore for the beginning thread. We just have 50% less thread tails to turn in for each design that we do. So I'm going to go ahead and start removing the stabilizer. When I get to either of the thread ends, I like to help reinforce with my thumbnail just so nothing does anything. Okay, once we get past that, you can just tear. And this Golden Threads quilting paper is actually designed for machine quilting. And I find that it holds up very well while you're stitching, yet it's, you could see how easy it was to work with. It wasn't so stiff that it made a problem, yet it tears away nicely and easily. And the good news is, if you have any little pieces of stabilizer stuck in your work, you can take, you can kind of rub them and they'll come away, but also any little pieces like that are on the back of your work. Oh, and here we go. We're going to our locked stitch, and we're going to be very gentle at the end again, just to err on the side of caution. There we go, and we'll make sure we get this off. There we go. Now we can just tear. Okay, while I'm getting my hand sewing needle, Kevin's going to show you the assortment of Wilcox and Gibbs needles. So we're at the point where we're going to go ahead and further secure this ending thread from our stitching. If you've done hand embroidery, this will look quite familiar to you once I get this thread to the back. Once I said here's the front of our work, we want to carry the thread to the back. I have threaded a hand sewing needle with a large eye, and we're going to discreetly carry this thread to the other side, being certain that we're not going back through the exact hole that the thread came out, because that's going to unzip it. So we want to be near enough to it so that it's a neat, discreet back stitch, but we want to make sure we're not unzipping. Okay, so we've got that. Now I'm going to flip us over to this side, bring that thread up to further secure it. And now, just as I would do if I did hand embroidery, I'm going to start weaving my thread end through the back line of here. You wouldn't want to cut your thread short at this point either, because with any pressure or wear on it or use, the thread is in danger of popping out and unzipping the whole design. So we're just kind of doing like we did with the machine in the beginning. I'm going to zigzag between some of these stitches, making sure that I'm keeping my thread on this side of the fabric. It doesn't peek through to the other side to make the design look messy. So you can do that for an inch and a half or so.